Hello and welcome to the Spirit Vessel Conversation Series, Professionals, Perspectives, and Deathcare. My name is Jessica Wirtz. I'm the founder of Spirit Vessel, and we're so glad you're here with us today. The Professionals, Perspectives, and Deathcare series is centered around conversations with professionals of all types in the death care and emotional wellness space. These conversations aim to help bring awareness, acceptance, and normalization to death and the grieving process. If you enjoy these conversations, please consider sharing them on your favorite social media platform and be sure to sign up for our newsletter so that you'll be the first to know when a new conversation is released. With me today is my sister and Spirit Vessel co-founder, Amanda McClellan, and we are joined by our guest, Cait Maddan.
Cait has a passion. Hello. Cait has a passion for educating on the full spectrum of death and end-of-life options and supporting her large digital community with whatever death resources are needed individually and collectively in these rapidly changing times. Cait's own experience with 2 life-changing deaths in 2 months is what propelled her curiosity into the unique and vast space of grief, death anxiety, dying, the afterlife, metaphysical curiosities, and so on. The pandemic forced the closure of her in-person business and her full attention turned to the virtual space, knowing that's where many folks go to access support and education. Cait's journey has led her into different avenues of death work, from sitting at the bedside of those actively dying, to cleaning out homes after a death, to haircuts for those on hospice, to educating hospice groups on what death doulas are, to guiding folks on living will creation, to building a digital presence for death workers. Truly, the space is vast. Currently, Cait offers free education via Instagram and TikTok and connecting through lives. You can further support her passion by following any of her social accounts, through purchasing digital downloads on her website, or becoming a member of Deathblood Life, a monthly guided death meditation membership. Welcome, Cait. Thanks for being here. We're so excited to have you, and we are longtime fans. We're so excited to dive into this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here today and can't wait to see where our conversation leads us.
Yeah, so we love your Instagram account and we watch all your reels, but tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into this work, a little bit more on, kind of diving into what I just shared about your bio there.
Yeah, that's a wonderful place to start. Those 2 back-to-back deaths, one being the death by suicide of my best friend and someone that I also worked in that in-person business with. And then 2 months later, the death of my grandfather. And both deaths were very different. The first of my friend, of course, was sudden and traumatic. And then 2 months later, my grandfather's death was slow and gradual. And so with my grandfather's death, I actually had the opportunity, unbeknownst to me, to serve him as a doula in that space. And it was interesting because during that time, everyone in the hospital room was retracting and very afraid to approach our dying grandfather, our dying family member. And it was a little bit out of body because I watched myself continually approach him and do all of the doula things that I now understand what a death doula does, a death worker. I was doing them then for him in that really gradual time period through his death labor. So it was after those 2 back-to-back deaths. It's the first of the year. This took place in October and December. And so here I am, the first of the next year, and I'm riddled with grief, although it was really hard to name at that point, especially after a sudden traumatic death like that. There was still a lot of disassociation and numbing and kind of that protective mechanism that our brain wraps us in those situations. And yet I was very aware of my death anxiety. I all of a sudden immediately was terrified and was asking myself all of these really existential questions that I had never asked before. Where do we go? What is this all about? I had been raised as a kid in a very heavily indoctrinated, organized religious culture. And so I had a lot of ideas about what the afterlife looked like and had to really deconstruct that because it brought a lot of fear and a lot of concern. So I began a journey at that point. Whether I knew it or not, I was on a journey. I was curious. I was afraid. I was all of it. And really the word, I just used it, that makes the most sense was the curiosity. That was one thing that did not dim through this process. It was like the questions kept coming and you need to find out and you need to get answers. And so, like I said, or like you read earlier, you know, where do most of us turn when we're looking for those answers? The internet and Instagram. And I found on Instagram, there were a few people, this was back in 2015. So on Instagram in 2015, there were people, of course, having some of these conversations, but not like it is modern day. And so really, I thought I hadn't heard anything about death workers or anything at that point. I was just looking for support as it relates to death education. And there wasn't really much that I was finding, but the few things that I really kind of took interest in were Pinterest posts that I would find. I'd go right on Pinterest, I'd do a search of death is normal or death positive, or just even I'd put in the search word of death. And they would give me all these quotes that have come up that, you know, philosophers have said over time and different ideas. And I started getting my curiosity quenched because I was getting different perspectives and reframing around this really vast topic of death, this really mysterious topic of death. And from my perspective, it was always a punishment. As a kid growing up in a very indoctrinated religion, I was told death is either good or bad. And so you kind of, you know, did your life around that. So these quotes that I would find and these reframing posts on Pinterest, I was like, you know, other people, yes, it's for myself first and foremost, but I want to now share this with some other folks, because if I'm afraid to die and if like I had all these existential questions, there's got to be at least a person out there that also is asking some of this stuff. And that's where my page on Instagram was born. And at first it wasn't under my own name. It was Death is Normal. That was my handle, at Death is Normal. And it was really cool because I did not have any consistency with my posting like I do now. I wasn't showing up daily, but when I would show up on that platform, the response I got from people that were seeing what I was putting out there was, Cait, you have to keep going with this content. You have to keep finding ways to show up in this platform because those of us that are reading it really appreciate it. And so one thing led to another. And then, of course, as we see now with time, the pandemic really forcing all of us inside, and myself especially, I just took a new approach and said, let me pour my whole creative energy, a lot of my focus into this space that we're all accessing all the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. I have like 1,000 questions to ask you from all of that. Your platform is absolutely wonderful. And I can only imagine how much comfort it gives to those who are grieving when they see that they're not the only ones asking those questions and having those thoughts. And I love that all of your work just stemmed from such an authentic place of being curious, and just following that passion that you had. And maybe you didn't even realize it was a passion at the time, but that curiosity that has become a passion of yours. So at what point did you realize you wanted to take steps to, did you do like a death doula training, or tell us about like what led you to that part?
Sure. I think so. This was like 2014 when my death occurred. And then 2015, I was on this really explorative journey. And then by 2016, I was ready to start serving people. I had decided that the bits that I was putting out on Instagram and how the comfort that it was bringing me, it's like, how do I then bring this to other people? And my first thought was hospice. It was something that I really hadn't had a lot of insight or tried before. I hadn't really heard much, but I knew that we did have a local hospice in my neighborhood. And I thought, I'll just reach out and see what it all entails. Coincidentally, and like, you know, I think it's always interesting when we can look back on stories and experiences and see the serendipity moments, if you will. But at the time, I was doing some volunteer work, and one of the people that I was helping with volunteering actually was a hospice coordinator. And so she was like, "Here, Cait, here's a stack of books. These stacks of books are the Barbara Carnes books." And I'm just making that note between all of us, because, or any listener as well, if you have heard of Barbara Carnes, Hospice RN, she's sold over 30 million copies of her books. And so she's just a phenomenal author. They're short little reads. And anyhow, I was gifted a stack of her books. And I was immediately just like, yeah, this is where I'm meant to be. Let me explore this further. So I really started with hospice volunteering locally. And I did that for about a year and a half. And with hospice volunteering, they had me doing everything, which was fantastic. I was able to sit bedside for people that were actively dying that didn't have any family members. I was able to do senior citizen fairs and festivals where we're just helping educate about what hospice is. I was able to then go and, like we mentioned earlier, do haircuts for people that were receiving these services. So hospice for me was really wonderful, because not only did they give me 7 weeks of training to begin, which I highly recommend for anyone listening that might be interested. You know, check out hospice, check out No One Dies Alone. A lot of times they are looking for volunteers, and also do a training program before you can serve people. And just after doing that for about a year and a half, I said, okay, I'm ready to just see what else is out there. This is calling to me deeply. And I connected on Instagram at that point with Alua Arthur, Going with Grace. They have a program that they offer. And I said, let me take this course. And what I found is that was a 14-week program. And by the time I had completed my hospice training and this 14-week training, I thought, you know, this is all so wonderful, but all of these things that I've learned in this course truly are things that are in each of us as humans. The course is just extra, you know, really, I think for like practical people like myself, I'm like, oh, good, I took a course and a class and I've got the binder now with a ton of information. But what I really learned is to be a death worker, to do this sort of work, and this was stuff I saw with my grandfather when we were propelled in that space, is someone who's able to, first of all, just be in the space where it's taking place, listening, an active listener, a compassionate heart. I mean, and these are all skills that we have as humans. And so I think that's just important to note too, because a lot of times we can all get caught up in like the certification and you're an official death doula. I would contend, and I would hope that one day we all feel that we are capable of doing and servicing people like this, even if it's just our own family members or ourselves when that time comes.
Absolutely. Jess and I talk about all that all the time. Oops, I think we just lost Jess for a second. I'll keep going here, but we talk about that all the time because it's almost what we do with ceremony and ritual is almost just remembering. It's a remembering, you know, of the fact that we did do this long ago, and culturally we don't anymore, but we all have that ability within us. And that's exactly like you said. Jess, I was just saying that you and I talk about that all the time, kind of remembering that we all have this within us, this capability to serve and grieve when we lose our loved ones. So I kind of have one more question that I'm really curious about, and then I'll let Jess dive in. But I know you talk a lot about grief anxiety. And as I was thinking before our conversation, I would imagine that sometimes even for myself, a lot of people don't think they have grief anxiety, but I think it presents in so many different ways that you don't even realize that it's on the back of your mind and you're thinking about it. So could you just share a little bit about what you see with grief anxiety, how you help people with grief anxiety, or anything in regards to that?
Oh, Amanda, you bring up such a good point. I think a lot of times with like death anxiety and grief anxiety, it's so subtle. It truly is. And I wonder if a part of that is because our nervous systems as a whole are really raw and don't get a lot of regulation as it is. So, you know, we get bombarded with these feelings. But I will say with my own personal death anxiety that I experienced, it's an overwhelming inability to really have different thoughts and different perspectives about death come in. And so for me, at my, what I almost look at as my peak with my death anxiety, I was not able to hear even the word death. I did not want to speak the word death. I truly, and I know there's people listening that will understand this, felt that if I said death, not passing, not lost my loved one, but they died, that somehow that would bring death upon me. And I think too, a lot of this goes back to that organized religion and the indoctrination, like you're condemned, but yeah, it's just the curiosity is what really serves us in our anxiety. And so I would invite anyone that might be kind of wondering if they're walking with grief anxiety and death anxiety is to get curious and maybe ask your grief anxiety and your death anxiety a question. Like, I get funky with it, okay? So just hear me out with an open mind. But I would ask my grief anxiety, my death anxiety, like, what do you want from me? What do you need me to hear from you? And really almost have like a conversation as if it was a person there. And it was interesting because in my exploration, when my heart was really raw with death anxiety, I approached a few people that I trusted to kind of maybe guide me in a direction. And one really dear friend that I'm still close with, you know, her suggestion when I told her I was terrified of dying was, "You're probably depressed," was her answer to me. And I thought that was really interesting because, of course, that was naturally how her perspective and how she was, you know, able to approach that. But what I realized was it wasn't depression, it was that curiosity. I wasn't getting that quenched. Nobody could just hear me out and hold space for me to say, I'm scared, and just like be there to listen to that. And so for me now, working with other people that have death anxiety and grief anxiety, it's not like there's a magic remedy. And I always lead with, I'm not a therapist. I am not here to, you know, diagnose or give advice. I'm simply opening up this space physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually for you, human, to explore this vast groundless space and know that you're safe, that there's another person here to hold your hand, or, you know, metaphorically hold your hand and say, you're not alone. And like, do you want to talk about that? And yes, that is scary. So I think that's a really beautiful reminder too. So much of what death doulas and death workers do is we're space holders. And that concept a lot of times is hard to understand, but that's really a great example. Not trying to cure or alleviate the anxiety, only acknowledging that it exists and kind of playing with it, if you will, getting curious to it.
Yeah, that is awesome. I just, so part of this whole series is normalizing, you know, normalizing death. I mean, it's inevitable. So I love everything you said there so much. Yeah.
Cait, I love it too. Thanks for sharing what you are right now. And I just feel like it's falling on the ears of so many people that just need to hear your message and what you're bringing through your work. And I feel that in this field right now, there's just so much space to be creative and so much space to say it again in a different way, and in a way that is heart-centered and relevant to our times and can really speak to what people need, instead of just these old social structures of where we've been through religion and just the structures of, well, you could point to any one of them at this point, they're all being questioned and dismantled at the same time, which is fantastic. But in my perspective, just how the death, you know, world, death in and of itself, and the industry that we have it in the United States, like any point of it just really needs to be relooked at and revamped. And it's just so fun in a way to be in this forefront of it, because we really get to help people see it differently and have hard conversations. And I just think a lot of like death values in a culture, you know, like we really lack solid death values in a culture. It's really come a lot from religion in the past. And now we're in this place of rewriting it. And I guess I'm just curious to see and to hear from your experiences too, like where do you really see things within your clients, within the people that you work with? Like what are their kind of belief systems and how are you helping morph them into something that's more helpful to them?
What a good point. Oh, you're right. It's so changing right now and fluid. And so many people are looking at their religion and bringing different elements of spirituality into that. And spirituality is defined by each of us individually. So that looks just as vast as death. And it's really kind of unique to once again just hold space as a death worker. We're not there to change or put our own thoughts on it. We really start where the person is at and say, hey, what are you looking for in this experience of life and death or your ceremony or service? And it really, because of my personal clientele, I'm working with people that are right around my age group. I'm seeing definitely tons of freedom and not a lot of conversation about organized religion and a lot of freedom around just defining that spirituality for them. And I think that's neat because I do have some older clientele as well, and they're very much in their faith and they know what they're looking for. And a lot of that does have a lot of those just really rigid or consistent ties of what we've seen for the last several decades. And so it's kind of this shifting time, as we all know, and we're all feeling, of course. But for my younger clientele, I love it because it's just that keeps me on my toes. And it's like, what do we want to create? What do we want to create rather than that ceremony that's already set up? And no matter what a person chooses, like I said, a death worker holds space for that. But I just think it's really fantastic. And like you pointed out, how we're at this point of change and so many people are embracing it and saying, what do I want for myself? Right down to the music, to the feel of it. And I have several people that will reach out with really interesting requests like, is it appropriate to have like dancing at my celebration of life? And I'm like, do you want dancing there? Like, how do you feel about that? Because personally, I think it's wonderful and I would hope someone's dancing at mine, but I think that just is something to be answered for each of us. And that's also why I love doing what I do, because there's nothing really standard about it. When I meet with a person, it's all brand new and it's like, what are we doing in this for you right here? And I love that variety.
I love how you answered this question. It's so dependent on the person and their beliefs and just where you enter into that conversation with them. So yeah, absolutely. Wow. I think, one thing for me is just like, how do I move through a day? Where are my rituals? How do I give myself what I need just to find grounding, getting through, days and weeks and months, and also while also having these larger conversations too with myself. And I'm curious for you, like, where do you really see rituals and ceremonies? How are you bringing that into your client's experience just to help them really ground in the reality of this life-death conversation that they're having with themselves?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love talking about grounding techniques, and I do think that it starts with the death worker. We have to ground ourselves before we then go in and walk alongside someone and even expect them to ground. So ritual, I think, is personally a part of my all-day experience, even right down to, for instance, before getting on our call together here, taking 2 minutes before hopping on, and I take 2 minutes and I wash my hands with really cold water. And while I'm right there with that cold water, which is just wonderful, like there's so many scientific benefits to cold water and usage with our brain. But I am able to get really conscious during that time, and whatever else is going on, whatever other distractions, whatever noise, it just stops for that time. And I'm able to be aware of, the feeling of my hands and maybe the smell of the soap and maybe the temperature of that water. And so it's important for each of us to find ways that work for grounding. that's just one way. And it's so simple acts of grounding and then carrying that into the client. So say that I've just sort of cleaned my hands and now I'm walking into this space. I'm able to take those really sort of intentional hands and maybe place them on the person if they're open to that, or if they're not and they're a hands-off person, maybe we can just do something where we're really near each other. And talking, I think grounding can be as simple as having that conversation. How are you feeling with my energy right around you, and being honest about that. So, grounding is so varied. It's going to be different for each of us. Once again, we're all just unique creatures, but super important, and would recommend that I ground first before attempting to ground anyone else, for sure.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that you speak so much to, well, just your experience as a doula, and just you've had so much experience. I can really hear it in all of the details that you can speak within. I actually did the Conscious Dying Institute program a little over a year ago. So I also have a certification in it. It's just such a wonderful program to walk into and to get all of these skills. But part of me was just like, realizing that all of these skills were already there. You don't need textbook anything for this. This is like how to be a really good human one-on-one and show up for somebody else really present, like 101, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's like this doesn't need a certification program. This needs like reteaching your own nervous system, just how to calm and how to be present and how to be open and loving. And, it's, I don't think of it so much as like, as a human, we got shut off from that, but as a culture, we got shut off from that. And that's what makes me most sad, but it's also where it's most exciting, because I see that like there's so much potential just in the individual to open back up to this experience. And it all starts with the individual.
Yeah. And just, that kind of, I just want to make note, because it's a question that I hear a lot too, like, is certification necessary to do this? Like, if I want to be a death worker or a death doula, do I have to go do that certification course? And the truth is, no, you do not have to. In the United States, it is legal for any one of us to say that we are a death doula or a death worker without that certification. And when we get certified by someone, like you said, through the Conscious Dying Institute, you're now certified with that particular company, just as I'm certified with Alua Arthur's particular one. So I love that. And I think there's so much benefit to going to take a course like we talked about earlier and getting that. But it is also really wonderful to note that it is still so fluid, and that this is inside of us. So, if you're feeling called to this space and you're not really sure like how you would even want to show up, and like, what if I don't want to take clients and like service people, but I'm really intrigued by death and helping people in some way as it relates to death, like, I would just invite you to get curious and like just stay in that space of asking the questions. Don't worry about making it into a business or any of that. Like, just be in the space and see what comes from that. Because the one thing that I have now learned from death is that it is a creative force, and it is, we all know the mystery of it, but because of that unknownness, it's going to have us pivoting all the time. So you may think you're showing up in this space in one way, and then only to find out death has another plan for you. So we got to stay open, I suppose.
I love that. That's such a great just way of saying it. It is such a creative force. It's not a stagnant force. It's not this end point. It's like, what's next, and how do we all handle this, and how do we do this together, and how are we moving through this transition that is one of, if not the largest transition of our lives? Like, how do we stay present to it so that we can feel creative in it? So really beautifully said.
Goosebumps as you said that. So confirmed.
Confirmed. Tell us a little bit about some of the resources that you provide your clients with to help them really get through, I'll just say, hard times. That can go from anywhere from like really walking close to death or just being death curious. And what are some of the ways and the resources that you work with your clients?
it really, once again, will depend on the person, what they're looking for support, where they're at in their death journey. My personal curiosity has been working with people. I kind of say, like, I have two soft spots, and one is really at the bedside with someone that's actively dying and oftentimes doesn't have much of a circle of care. And then another type of person that I really enjoy working with is not necessarily someone that has any sort of diagnosis that they know about, but is just really wanting to get curious and in touch with their mortality. And so because of that, that can look just so wide in the range of being able to support them.
So you're very much one-on-one with your clients.
Yes, and also because of that, I found that I was only able to serve a small number of people because of that one-on-one and that attention. And, I have some people like that will meet with their whole entire family. Like, for instance, right now I'm working with one individual and she's got 3 kids and she's got stage 4 cancer. She's in palliative care. So this is something that she is actively working on curing. And yet, there's that looming cancer above. And so we're wanting to bring in legacy projects. We're wanting to bring in conversation with the kids around death and life and funerals, kind of all of it. And a lot of times it can feel, I think, to the person experiencing it, like, oh no, I've got so much to accomplish. Like, I'm just now starting this, and like, I lost time. And really, my job, my space is to just be that anchor and say, you're right on time. Let's see where you're at. What's most important to you moving forward? Is it, helping your kids kind of understand where you're at in your journey? Or is it creating a legacy project for something that they'll be able to receive many years down the road? With the time we have, where do we want to focus our attention? So that'll depend on if a person has, and we don't know how much time each of us have. So it's almost foolish to talk about in this concept, but a little bit of a difference when you're working with someone that is actively dying compared to someone that potentially has more time.
The direction that you go of just being so present in the moment with your clients and not trying to cover it up as, okay, when you're through this or, after this moment, I love that because it's really just so honest and pure, and in the moment is the only thing we have. And that is whether we're actively dying or actively living, however you want to say that, because it's true, we don't know. But just that level of presence is just so honest and beautiful and healing in the moment, I would imagine.
Yes. And some people want to talk about it really candidly, talk about death really candidly, and others are like, please, we're not going to say that right now like that. And so it's like, okay, we'll start where you are. We'll see how we can weave in really gently, if that's what's needed for that particular person.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, we are excited to hear about another project you have going on. Would you tell us about Deathblood Life and what you're up to with that?
I would love to. This is my newest project, so I'm so excited to share it every opportunity I get. Deathblood Life is a monthly membership where we are offering opportunities for folks to explore death safely. And we use the word meditation, but I really like to open that up because I think mainstream nowadays, the word meditation just has a lot of stuff attached to it. I oftentimes will call them like guided visualizations, but really what you do and what we have people do is we have you come to an 1.5-hour pod where you are transported into whimsy and unseen and really able to explore groundlessness safely. And that is such a huge asset because each of us, being a human, will experience death at one point. And when we are dying, and whether it be a quick death or a fast death, we will have that point of, here I am, and here I am walking through this experience. And how each of us meets that moment is going to be different. Our death attitudes and our life attitudes oftentimes are very similar. And this space is really an opportunity for folks, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable you are with the topic of death, to come and just start safely exploring through breath work, through guided imagery. And it's neat because we actually take you through death meditations. And so oftentimes, sometimes you might actually experience and hear what it would be like to die. And that's really quite interesting to experience that and get curious to that before it actually happens to each of us. And maybe by getting exploring and curious to that when it actually happens, when our death meets us, we're not as scared or what have you.
Yeah. Oh, I love this project. We're so excited to see where it goes. It's just it seems like such a wise way to enter this topic because it's just using the modalities that people do already know to a large extent, meditation, visualization. It's not just like diving in and like, let's write our paperwork, it's just like, let's just kind of have this conversation a little bit at a time and ease you into it and just stay in your body centered and relaxed while doing so. So really wise. I'm curious if you have, so I hear you have plenty of projects on your table right now. And I'm just curious to know, like, what are you most excited about for where this industry is headed?
Oh, wow. Who knows? I'm excited though. I have no idea where it's headed, but I'm excited for wherever it's headed. And that is because right now we're all talking about it. We're all ready to just converse and ask those questions and be like, I'm ready to listen too. And that's something that we haven't seen from humanity in this culture for a long time. So that's really exciting. I see so many death workers and death doulas rising right now that I hope and I just know that this will be the case, that we'll have new accessibility as it relates to death support. Hospice is a burdened system. It was designed many years ago to do what we're hoping to do now. And because of insurance and because of all the systemic stuff, of course, naturally, it's changed into what it is now. And they're not able to be there at the moment of death. And they're not able to spend a lot of time with the family or the dying individual. And so I just really see the rise of a lot of death workers and a lot of death doulas, folks hearing that internal dialogue of, yeah, I could do this and I could do this for other people. And I think it's going to be needed because we're just watching the world and all of the going on right now. And there's a grief crisis, there's a death crisis, of course. So as weird and hard as the world is, I am hopeful because there's a lot of us that are having these conversations and that are like, you know what, we're ready to support the future, however that looks, as it relates to death and dying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I get curious about, and just in this conversation of wondering what's possible and where we're at currently, where we're going, and then the gaps in between is like, are people ready to pay for a service such as their own death? Like, it just feels like there's still such a gap there. It's like, if it's not a crisis, if it's not a birth or something that's happening immediately that we need immediate attention on, like, are we willing to have the longer conversation of getting there? And just curious where you are seeing that specific topic.
We have to get somewhere with this, because what's happening also is that death workers and death doulas are also not going to be accessible for the people that actually need it, the underserved, marginalized communities. And right now it's the white folks that have a certain amount of income that are able to afford a death worker doula that can bring this on, much like we saw for quite a while with the birth doulas. If you had the ability to then bring someone additional onto the team, that's who was able to utilize and access these services. So we have got to continue to address how to make death workers and death doulas accessible for all. And there's a lot of us doing some really unique things in ways to make that accessibility happen, things ranging from like sliding scales and memberships to make it a little bit more practical. But also I think this is where maybe now we're seeing, hey, this might not be the business that we all think it's going to be. And maybe now the focus has to be on education and getting everyone equipped in their homes like we did hundreds of years ago, where we would service our own families as they were walking through death. Maybe we now have to get back to that. And there'll still be, of course, systems and caregivers of people to aid, because that naturally is here, but we've got to have conversations about how to make this role as a death worker, death doula, accessible for everyone, because right now it's not, and there's so many people that need it naturally.
Yeah, thanks for saying all of that. That was absolutely true, and really good points all around right there. So, well, before we start to close out, Cait, is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation, or just anything else you'd like to share with our guests before we tell them all about where they can find you?
You know, I think this has just been a wonderful conversation. So thank you. I'm always so excited to see where it goes. And I think I would just mostly recap what we've said and just invite folks to be open and curious as it relates to the topic of death. You may have grown up with some religion that might have told you one way, or maybe you've experienced a few life experiences that have made you feel certain ways. I would just invite you to get maybe a new level of curiosity there, maybe kind of scratch the surface a little bit and see how that feels for what's lying underneath. Because right now is a really fluid time to get curious and to wonder, and we're surrounded by death and grief. So why not now just start to ask those really kind of big questions? And of course, you're going to give my resources of where you can find me. And when you look up those pages, they have the book recommendations for if you're feeling overly anxious as it relates to death. We have the downloads to walk you through all of the things you would need for your end of life, practical planning. So I really think, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and please know that if there's something inside of you that is curious, to just follow that.
Absolutely. Beautiful. And can you tell us where people can learn more about your work?
Great. Well, you can all come over to Instagram and of course TikTok. I'm at Cait, CAIT .death education, and that is on both of those platforms. I have a huge passion right now for creating short form video content for all of us to consume. We're all enjoying our reels and our videos, so both of those platforms are where you can find that information.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Cait. We've really enjoyed having you on today.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Yes, we're all enjoying your video content. So for our listeners, as a reminder, if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please share it on your favorite social media platform, and be sure to sign up for our newsletter at spiritvessel.com/newsletter so that you'll be the first to know when a new conversation is released. Thanks, Cait.
Thank you.